Greetings, viewers and listeners. Welcome to yet another episode of Liberating Minds Podcast. My name is Maxwell Magawi. I work with the National Students Caucus. Today, we're going to talk about the new university funding model. It's currently one of the biggest elephants in the country, so to speak. The new university funding model can be looked at in so many ways, but on this particular one, allow me to look at it as one of the many symptoms of neoliberal democracy and by extension, neoliberal economy. And that is exactly how it qualifies, because the neoliberal discourse has largely been premised on privatization of public goods and services. And the education and the health sector have been the core casualties to this end. So that we're dealing with a funding model or a university funding model that is premised on typically increasing the cost of access to education, it becomes very difficult not to see the hand of neoliberal democracy or the neoliberal discourse in this whole arrangement. The new university funding model, if looked at through these lenses, then it should easily be seen as one of those attempts that have historically been made by the neoliberal economic architecture to isolate the masses, especially those from the global south, as much as possible from opportunities for self-advancement. So it becomes therefore imperative that the analysis and the mitigation of the adverse effects of the new university funding model need to factor in the overarching hand or the ever-present hand of the neoliberal discourse in the economic affairs of third world countries. This particular funding model is a departure from the old funding model where the cost of access to education was applied uniformly for the government-sponsored students. I mean, there was a uniform charge that was spread across all learners, irrespective of the assessed financial or social background. Now, what makes this the university funding model conspicuously different from the old funding model is that it classifies learners into different social categories. And in particular, it classifies learners into 5 different social categories. So basically, it calls them bands. So there's the band 1. So band 1, these are learners who are extremely needy and very much deserving of help. Band 2, maybe needy but not as needy as the ones in band 1. The band 3, these are students who are from stable background, though not very stable. The band 4 are students who are from relatively stable background and can afford or can cope up with most of the financial pressures in the course of their studies. And then band 5, these are basically students who are assumed to be well off. These are students who are doing well and will therefore, be in need of as minimal government input as possible. So the very way in which the students have been banded, so to speak, give the government the opportunity to decide on how many students or what number of students could be placed in what band. And it's a reductionist arrangement. So basically the students who have been placed in band 1 would get more assistance, and all the way to band 5. So the band 5 are expected to get the least assistance. If you look at the manner in which the funding model has so far been applied, you realize that most students have been placed in band 5. The students who applied for government support, the students who enrolled in different higher learning institutions, most of them have found themselves placed in band 5. So this basically implies that there will be very minimal government intervention in terms of meeting the cost of their learning. The number of students who have found themselves in other bands cumulatively are way less compared to the number of students who are now in band 5. So it only means that the government has sadly walked away from its responsibility of providing education or providing affordable university education. Because compared to the old funding model where there were no bands, once you qualified for government sponsorship or for government funding, then it will pretty much be that. Even in the allocation of government loans by the Higher Education Loan Board, it wasn't really premised on bands. And, there wasn't so much emphasis on the economic background or the economic prospects of the individual learner applicant. But right now, that is the case. And even you look at it still, even those who will be lucky to find themselves in lower bands, the bulk of the funding is largely on loans. So it basically means that they may have a pretty easier time in the course of their studies. But then when they're done and they've graduated and now it's time to, try to get employment opportunities here and there, then of course they're still going to deal with the brunt of, servicing loans and, coping up with the high cost of living and all these other debts. So at the end of the day, either way, those who are lucky enough will escape for now. But in the very final analysis, the whole can of worms will pour on their parts because they'll have to, cater for the loans later on. Those who are not lucky will have to deal with them upfront. So either way, the cost of education has been greatly heightened. And, numbers don't lie. Traditionally, before the old funding model, you will find students paying way less, conventionally below 30,000. But now with the new funding model, we're yet to see any institution that charges new entrants anything less than 50,000. So either way, it's a shoot. It's a very significant shoot or significant rise in the cost of access to university education. First of all, the state needs to be very honest with itself and with the Kenyan people. And that honesty should entail acknowledging the fact that education is a public good and, should therefore be treated as such. Education should not be an instrument of class division or, separating one caste of people from the other. Historically, for the last over 20 years, so just to say, since the third president of Kenya assumed the presidency, His Excellency Honorable Mwai Kibaki, this was back in 2003, there was this whole excitement around free primary education. Perhaps it's time we went back to the basics. What were the kind of conversations which were had to make the dream of free primary education a reality? And then how can we escalate such conversations to make sure that we end up having free education in other levels, so basically high school and tertiary institutions. The budgetary allocation within the Kenyan education sector has increased since 2003. We've been seeing gradual increase in budgetary allocation. It's therefore ironical that, the increase in budgetary allocation within the Kenyan education sector has been met with the dwindling access. Perhaps it's a question of the management of education funding and just how much of this money goes down to the individual institution and therefore to the benefit of the individual learner. Or do we end up losing most of these monies to, the bureaucratic web or the bureaucratic chain within the Kenyan education sector, in that the funds allocated for education activities end up serving everything except their sole purpose, which is to facilitate the learning processes of the Kenyan learners. We've been curating this idea of a national education fund. So this is a fund that is basically supposed to have all monies that are meant for education in Kenya into one basket. Then we come up with a very clear structure on how this money should be managed. The cost of administering this structure ought to be a very negligible percentage of the overall monies that are thrown into this fund. So basically this fund should capture everything from bursaries to scholarship to, tuition expenses, anything, any coin that will be spent in education, so that we don't end up having the funds meant for education scattered all over the political offices, as you are seeing currently where, the office of the president seems to be having a bursary, the first lady, the second lady, the deputy president. Name it, almost every elected office seems to be interested in having a share of the education fund. Education becomes a highly politicized process, and that is reflected in the manner in which even its funding is done. So can we just remove politics from our education funding and look at education funding from a very professional lens, so that we become more intentional in terms of making sure that the money that exists, the money that is meant for facilitating the education processes in the country, the money that is supposed to develop institution, is exhaustively used for such purposes in such a way that whatever financial gaps that may still exist not because there is wastage or leakages, but because there's genuine shortage in terms of, the logistical realities we are dealing with. That way, we'll be in a position to, more accurately know exactly what else in terms of funding needs to be added into the education kitty for us to attain the dream of a free education, both from primary, secondary to, tertiary institutions. So tertiary, we're talking about undergraduate. This, I believe, will move us closer and closer to the dream of a free education. But then for the interim, the new funding model is not needed. On the very least, let the country go back to the old funding model. Then we can use that as a temporary place to, more comfortably reflect on what avenues that still need to be explored in our quest for, a country that offers free education opportunities for its young people from kindergarten to undergraduate. The state must stop listening to itself and start listening to the mood of the country. So basically what the people or the Kenyan people are saying about the new university funding model. Let the president and his team desist from these unnecessary face-saving exercises. We don't need a 129-member committee to review the new university funding model. What is needed is that the new university funding model be withdrawn in totality, because what it has so far met is, resentment and resistance from the Kenyan people. So it's not needed. It's not needed at all. Forming a 129-member committee to review a document that is over 98% unpopular is problematic. It's hypocritical. It comes across as dishonest and a very hopeless and desperate face-saving exercise by the president himself, because, the buck stops with him. We cannot really peg our arguments strictly on the Ministry of Education. The Ministry of Education is just an implementer of government policies within the education sector. So this has to go directly to the president. We don't need a 129-member committee to review the funding model. What we need right now is to drop the funding model in its totality, at least for the interim, go back to the old funding model, but then now start having deliberate conversation on the possibility of free university education. Because it's very, very possible based on the analysis that I've given past. The student community and the public at large have been in very close work relationship in just trying to expose the contradictions around this new university funding model and, just calling for its withdrawal. The National Students Caucus, for instance, less than 2 weeks ago, had a summit on free education. It brought on board different university students and student leaders from different universities, largely within the Nairobi region, to just firm up its position against the new university funding model and, give just one extra call for the state to withdraw it in totality.
Hizi pingu zimenifunga zikanishinda kusonga mbele, nashindwa kanta shinda hapa milele, nahitaji ukombozi sahi, nahitaji ukombozi sahi.